Hello, hi, good to see you, everyone. Welcome to the BCSP presentation of Balkan Defence Monitor and also panel on regional relations in the region of the Western Balkans. It is my pleasure to welcome you all here in Crown Plaza. Also, it is our pleasure to welcome the people who came from the region to the event and to share their expertise and also their knowledge from perspective of their countries, what's going on in the region. Balkan Defence Monitor is done in cooperation with the support of Canadian Embassy, second time in a row, and for this we are grateful to Embassy for financial support. We hope that we will continue this. We think that this type of projects very much have sense in the circumstances and the environment that we have in the region. And without further ado, I will give floor to Ambassador of Canada, Giles Norman, who will also greet you on behalf of the Embassy. Ambassador, please.
Thanks, Igor, for leading off and for your kind invitation. Thank you all for coming today. Some of you having traveled quite a distance, so I really appreciate it. It's my pleasure to be here again. About a year ago, almost a year ago, last March, I opened this conference to present the first iteration of the Balkan Defence Monitor. The Russian invasion of Ukraine had just started at that point. And of course, last week we marked 1 year of this blatant aggression against a neighbor in a peaceful country by Moscow. The shockwave of Russia's military aggression has been felt around the world. It's displaced millions, it's killed thousands, it's disrupted the global economy and exacerbated global problems such as food and energy security in Europe and, of course, in the global south as well. The invasion is a direct violation of international law and Ukraine's sovereignty as a nation. Ukraine and its people have suffered greatly. We're seeing appalling human rights violations, conflict-related sexual violence, the discovery of mass graves and torture chambers, and all sorts of imageries that bring back traumatic memories for lots of us in this region and across the continent that we had hoped we would never see again. But despite all of this, the Ukrainian people remain resilient. They continue to resist and fight for their freedom. They remain steadfast in their commitment to their homeland and its independence, and we stand with them. We will continue to help them defend their country. Canada's commitment to Ukraine is unbreakable. Public opinion is overwhelmingly committed to support for Ukraine, and we are in it for the long haul, paraphrasing another great global leader. So since February 2022, Canada has committed or delivered over $1.2 billion in military support. We've trained over 35,000 Ukrainian troops, and we've committed $2.6 billion plus in financial assistance to Ukraine, including loans and grants. We've also provided $320 million in humanitarian assistance to help address the needs of the most vulnerable. We've welcomed over 150,000 Ukrainians fleeing the conflict to Canada, and we've imposed sanctions on 1,600 individuals and entities that are complicit in President Putin's war of aggression. So here we are a year later, and there are many unanswered questions ahead of us, but one thing is certain, and that has come out of the events. We need verifiable and reliable facts and data even more than ever in such a charged climate. So last year, I was happy that we supported Balkan Defence Monitor that was designed by the Belgrade Centre for Security Policy before Russia started the war. And when we were launching the project, I thought the idea was quite visionary, as it had found a sort of a weak spot where disinformation and fake narratives can flourish. And today, I think that time has vindicated that choice and our support to Balkan Defence Monitor. It's also increased its value. The need for a reliable and comprehensive database is needed more than ever to help reduce the impact of false narratives. The political and military earthquake following the Russian invasion of Ukraine had a global impact, including here in the Western Balkans, and we're going to hear more about that later in one of the panels. For a year, the already complex security environment in this region is now being filtered through the broader context of the war in Ukraine and Russian aggression and disinformation. And we saw this last summer when tensions spiked between Belgrade and Pristina. The Western Balkans are often mentioned in media and elsewhere as a second front or an arena in the wider conflict. The truth, as we know, is of course more complex. But as U.S. Senator Hiram Johnson said before the Second World War, the first casualty when war comes is truth. And Balkans Defence Monitor's work has never been more important in a highly charged environment like that to try and minimize the casualty that is truth. The Western Balkans has seen a significant shift in their defense policies over the past decade. We're seeing increased defense expenditures, participation increasing in international military missions, and the region has become an important strategic arena in Europe. Also, though, however, a vulnerable point for Kremlin malign propaganda and disinformation, and this, we anticipate, will continue. Defense topics are often misused for belligerent rhetoric in the Balkans, primarily because of the legacy of past conflicts in the region. So lots of misinterpretations about information about armaments, military expenditures, or cooperation often circulate through the media in the region, creating and feeding an atmosphere, an environment of fear and mistrust. This is especially true when it comes to reports of genuine, legitimate military activities of regional countries. In the past, some news outlets have reported on military exercises, for example, often portraying them as a precursor to some sort of imminent threat, aggression, or provocation, often without much evidence to support these claims. And this drives a sense of fear, and we've seen media reports on the possibility of a military conflict between the countries involved, even though that possibility is very remote. Reports about attempts to expand military capabilities often heighten tensions as well and have been used as a tool to spread fear and disinformation. And this is where Balkan Defence Monitor is particularly critical for us. It's a valuable resource that offers an ability to fact check, to offer credible data that will then tackle some of these hostile narratives that we can all use and those in the responsible media can use as well. So today we're going to hear from experts on the region, particularly on the impact on the region of the war in Ukraine. And I hope this discussion will lead to a better understanding of the region's defense policies. I want to thank all the panelists in both panels for joining us today. I look forward to a fruitful discussion. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stefan Goranović. I'm a political journalist based in Belgrade, and I shall continue where Ambassador stopped and start by mentioning that last week it has been exactly a year since the beginning of the Russian aggression. This aggression changed a lot, not only in that part of the world, but in the much wider region, and the ongoing war and the destabilization of the European security environment are turning our focus even more towards our own defense systems and mechanisms, resources and institutions. However, in recent years, local political elites in the Western Balkans often use the military as a tool of domestic political promotion, and the lack of transparency in defense policies makes that possible. And it has been like that in previous years. To counter this, the defense-related data, as the ambassador said, need to be well accessible to all citizens in the Western Balkans. And this is why the Belgrade Centre for Security Policy launched this Balkan Defence Monitor research project, which is already online on the BalkanDefenceMonitor.com. And you can go ahead and check it out. This document is there to collect and analyze key information about defense policies in our region. And this is not the first one of its kind. The first one was published last year. And it is a document which gives us an insight into defense expenditures, key strategic documents, international military cooperation, and representation of women in defense sectors. The last year highlighted the need for transparency in our own backyard and That is why, ever since the Russian invasion began, the importance of the Balkan Defence Monitor is even greater. In this regard, we are honored to have a distinguished panel of experts who will share their perspectives and experiences. I will start with Vuk Vuksanović, Senior Researcher at the Belgrade Centre for Security Policy. Good to have you here, Vuk.
Thank you, Stefan.
Andrea Stojkovski, Executive Director and Senior Researcher Analyst from the Prespa Institute from Skopje. Well, very warm welcome also to you. And Mr. Arjan Durmishi, Executive Director from the Center for the Study of Democracy and Governance from Albania.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome all, and I just need, before we start the panel, to tell you that this panel is being streamed on YouTube, and you're more than welcome to think about the questions here in the room, but also online, and you can post them in comments of the YouTube stream. So a lot of topics and hopefully interesting discussion, but Vuk, let me start with you. Shall we start with the new security environment imposed upon us after the invasion began? How did our region of the Western Balkans react to this?
Thank you, Stefan. Well, when I started working on this project, and it was a team effort, so I mean, a big thank you to all the other researchers from the BCSP who also gave their contribution, Maja, Maria, and Milica. I mean, when I started working, one of the aspects on which I found particularly interesting was the issue of defense strategies, of strategic documents. Which is, of course, in every country, these documents constitute a doctrinary pillar on how a country navigates its foreign security and defense policies, particularly when we have such a dangerous and flared-up global security environment, particularly after 24th of February 2022. What I found, of course, very interesting was the fact that once you check the national security doctrines and documents of every one of the 6 selected Western Balkan countries, you see that none of them actually adopted a new strategic document for this year. And of course, this tells you something about the reality of decision making. I mean, of course, in some countries, like for example, the US, I mean, every presidential administration has an obligation to present to the public their national security strategy. Of course, we might be comparing apples and oranges as we are talking about the most powerful and most robust national security apparatus in the world, the American one. But nevertheless, even with that very important distinction, that also tells you something about the planning and decision making in the defense policies of the local nations, where the process is, even without the war, the process of adopting new strategies and even pursuing them in a consistent fashion is always been a bureaucratically and politically painful and assiduous process. I mean, if we there is always this, if we just take a look at the basic theory, there is always this debate about whether the decisions are made by, whether policies are formulated by state bureaucracies or by political leaders based on their statecraft skills and their political instincts.
Even with the war in our own backyard.
Of course. Well, I mean, but there is this type of debate in general. That is a debate which transcends even the international environment. But in every well-organized national security system, there is always a combination. On one hand, the state bureaucracy, which gives a continuity to the policy, but of course there is always a wise political statecraft which gives a more contextual tone. In this case, the fact that none of the Western Balkan countries has adopted new strategies, particularly in this very much altered and very dangerous international environment, tells you that in the Western Balkans, the decision related to defense and security policies are still being made top-down by individual political leaders and by their immediate advisory entourage. So that tells you that there is not that much debate neither when it comes to the wider state apparatus nor when it comes to society, so that this process is extremely slow, and yes, it can be even potentially troublesome when you see that there is not even mention that the new national security strategies will be adopted in any one of the involved countries. But of course, if I were still to guess, I mean, which countries are to to adopt new strategic doctrinary documents in light of these new changes, I would still bet on the four of the six selected countries which are member of NATO alliance: Croatia, Albania, North Macedonia, and Montenegro, for the simple reason that the alliance to which they belong to has adopted last year their new strategic. NATO has adopted their new strategic concept. I mean, and just to give you one very important caveat from this new strategic concept, this new strategic concept, if you go online, has about 11 pages. Russia, on this 11-page document, is being mentioned 14 times. China, as opposed to that, is being mentioned only 2 times, once as a threat and the other time in the context of its partnership with Russia. While the old national security strategies of all Western Balkan countries pretty much are focused on the old themes of when it comes to the potential national security threats. Invasion is being mentioned as a potential, although not a probable security threat. Nationalism, ethnic separatism, economic instability, organized crime and terrorism, these are the old themes. And Russia and China are frequently not being mentioned in the old national security strategies of Western Balkan countries, but I expect that this change will happen. Will happen in those 4 out of 6 selected Western Balkan countries. Bosnia will have a very difficult time of even having a rational national security debate, given the heavy changes in its political system and its chaotic state administration. While on the other hand, the biggest challenge will, of course, be for Serbia, how to adopt a new national security and defense policy in light of the fact that the country still remains burdened with its balancing act between Russia and the West, its policy of military neutrality, and also with the unresolved Kosovo dispute.
Just very briefly, what could be the consequence of not adopting the new type of document?
Well, the consequences is that the average citizens will have no idea what his government is planning. And at the same time, once you have this type of policy setting, that means that the entire success of your policy depends actually on how skillful the individual leaders are. Now, of course, individual leaders can be very skillful, but if there is no good strategy, if there is no guarantee that there is a well-coordinated mechanism between various layers of state apparatus, the luck tends to run out.
Andrea, North Macedonia has the national security strategy from, if I'm not mistaken, 2003, but the defense strategy is newer, 2020. So given that the defense is part of the wider national security context, how does that function? Is it causing bureaucratic, political, or strategic challenges?
First, thank you for the invite. Second, this is extreme pleasure for me because this is the first time that I'm actually going to be able to praise the government for its work. Usually when I've been going around on conferences speaking about EU affairs, I've been criticizing the government a lot, even lately. However, this time I need to give praise where praise is necessary to be given. First off, the Ministry of Defense has been, for the last 3 years, recognized as the most transparent ministry in the government. And this says a lot. Speaking on data, we've tried to deconstruct some of the folk narratives or folklore around foreign influences, presence in the country, etc., meddling or interferences in domestic policies. And we looked for data. We looked for data from the Ministry of Defense as well, and we received everything that we required. Of course, I'm not going to be able to share much of it with you, but you can certainly see the calculations and our ranking with the index of International Impact Index on our website and see how countries fare when it comes to military cooperation. With regards to your question, the country became NATO member in March 2020, so 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago, and that's the beginning when Europe and the world experienced the heaviest of lockdowns due to COVID-19. Just before that, the country approved modifications to the law on defense, which elevated the level of the national security strategy to the highest degree, and approved certain changes, approved additional changes, which enabled us to go into drafting new defense strategy. The national defense strategy and the security strategy are now under a review process. And this is due mainly because, first, the security strategy is severely outdated since the beginning of the millennium or of the century. And it needs to be aligned with the new strategic concept. When it comes to the defense strategy, the alignment is basically with the new, with the current state of affairs. COVID-19 happened after the defense strategy was approved. So this also has to be taken into consideration. And then another praise for the ministry. The process has already started. There is a project committee established within the Ministry of Defense, which will tackle not just these two strategies, but also the strategy on cyber defense or cyber security, hybrid threats, managing and fighting disinformation, the law on critical infrastructure, etc., etc. I mean, there is a long list of legal and strategic documents that are going to be modified or elaborated and approved through this process. And the process also includes not just people from the ministry, from civil servants within the ministry, staff from the army, but also experts from the academia and civil society, which speaks about, again, the transparency of the ministry, or the capacity for transparency within the ministry, and the inclusiveness of deliberation and decision making.
Mm-hmm. So were there any challenges because of this outdated documents so far, or?
I would say not really. Not really because of those two documents. Mostly because of some other documents that we are witnessing. If you have, well, I guess the audience here has read. The country is most susceptible for disinformation. And although we've joined or aligned with the EU sanction list 100%, unlike the host country here, we are still experiencing the propaganda and misinformation coming from Russia. So cybersecurity and hybrid threats and disinformation is something that we are experiencing as a challenge at the moment, which is still not because of the discrepancy between the two. Mm-hmm. Other strategies. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Arjan, how did Albania define its security challenges in the context of the war in Ukraine? I'm guessing that here in Serbia we didn't have a lot of opportunities to hear about that.
Yep. Again, thank you for inviting me to this important event, and congratulations for the study. Very, very important, and it's good to pursue this continuously. Strategic documents in Albania have been, since 2000s, had been regularly adopted, often in response to some developments, but there is a sort of systemism in these documents. There is no a certain logic of periodization that they are revised every certain period of time. There is an issue generally of coherence among the documents. There is, for instance, in an assessment that I have conducted in 2014 of all the strategic documents of military and national document, I found that there were different definitions of threats. So the threats categorization was changing and shifting through the revisions, meaning that if you want to pursue strategic objective, that means long term, and if you switch them, if you change them over a few years, then that tells you that strategic as a concept, or strategic culture as a variable that determines the product of the document, in a way is shaky. So that's another perspective that I would add when it comes to analyzing this document as more as an artifacts to further analysis, like giving them the designed importance that often is being given to them. So the last document has been adopted in 2014, and it was then succeeded by the military strategy, which then was followed by this long-term development plan of the modernization of the armed forces. which was an attempt to try to put in a succession and in a coherence these documents. And every year there is a directive that is issued by the Ministry of Defense that in a way breaks down on annual level the implementation or the operationalization of these documents. Albania has been attempting to revise these documents since 2019, but then COVID happened, and then the war in Ukraine, and this has been shifting between prioritization on civilian and soft power or military power that was sort of shown by the war in Ukraine. So in this respect, the hesitation or the delay to adopt a new document in a way shows the challenges that small countries have to adjust themselves in global developments. Particularly as during last year, Albania suffered some very heavy attacks, cyber attacks, which were attributed to Iran actually. And as a result of this, Albania severed the diplomatic ties with Iran and expulsed the diplomatic staff. So cybersecurity has emerged as one of the main threats which I assume will feature prominently in the new document. And already, but this relates to what Vuk said before, that it is mostly the actions that anticipate the strategy rather than the other way around. There's been already actions to finance, to support cybersecurity systems during this year in the annual budget of this year for defense. The Ministry of Defense has been given the role of coordinating the overall cyber defense systems in Albania, and there is a lot going on into this. But there is also, in terms of modernization of the military, there are also upgrades of the Air Force. I mean, Albania is actually until this year did not have fixed wing aircraft since it abolished them in the mid 2000s. But now it's just purchasing unmanned vehicles like drones, which has already signed a contract to buy like 5 of them, which will be armed drones. So this is a kind of a combined upgrade of hardware and but also cybersecurity. So that's more or less the kind of direction the finances are being put when it comes to, and we can sort of relate this to the discussion on the budget later. But the bottom line is that strategies, I'd concur on what Vuk said, are not so much the important documents that we often tend to think of.
Mm-hmm. But what are your expectations when it comes to Albanian policies after the war started? You mentioned the cyber threats from Iran, but has the war in Ukraine fueled some of the arms procurement, or where do you expect the policy shift will take place in the context of the war, or that's not?
Yeah, well, the war in Iran has been in Ukraine has affected mostly Albanian foreign policy alignment. Albania has been quite active because it's just has this membership for 2 years in the UN Security Council, so it's been very active in supporting Ukraine and in promoting diplomatic action and condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine from that position. And there have been also visits of the prime ministers and MPs in Ukraine just as a sign of support. And but there has not been any distinct, except for the cyber defense, which is sort of a more global threat. There has been no reflection onto relating the invasion of Ukraine with defense capabilities. Albania has been promoting also, on the other hand, has been very active in promoting this open Balkan concept, which actually suggests that the countries should take a less military approach because they actually do not need this. So in this respect, there's been quite a balanced approach to sort of not associate or not enter into this kind of military competition that can be seen as seeing threats from the region. When it comes to military threats from Russia, Albania has aligned this into the NATO alliance framework. So there has been no individual action or definition of Albania vis-a-vis this particular. So it's more in the multilateral level that Albania has been active.
And Vuk, in previous years, the media reported from time to time about Serbia partaking in joint military exercises, but also we were talking quite a lot about multinational missions. So what is their role in Serbian foreign and defense policies?
Yes, of course. Well, I mean, I would say that this, while one would not think about it in first place, but the story about multinational military drills and multinational peace missions tells something about all the ups and downs, twists and turns of Serbia's foreign and defense policy ever since the overthrow of Milosevic's regime back in 2000. I mean, when it comes to military drills, I think that I mean, we probably have several military personnel and military attachés here in this room already. I mean, so on that point, I mean, I think that it is pretty similar. I mean, you simply define for what is your security environment and what you need to be prepared for. I mean, and of course, you find based on that suitable partners. Now, of course, NATO was the dominant one, and this was, of course, the simple logic of geography. With or without NATO membership, so I mean, Serbia is encircled by NATO alliance, so that tells you something about what you have to take into account first. And of course, we also had the notion that after Milosevic's year, the army needed to modernize, to become a more 20th century army rather than this rump leftover of the old Yugoslav communist partisan style army. And of course, the idea that you, particularly since back in those days, the fashionable rhetoric in global security circles was the notion of collective security, multilateral environment, the fact that back then people still thought that the old traditional military threats were out of the window and that threats emanating from globalization and non-state actors are the dominant trend. So on that point, the army completely started to apply NATO standards, and that was pretty much the alley where the army went. But of course, when Serbian foreign policy began to be dominated by the unresolved Kosovo dispute, and which resulted in Serbia playing the Russian card much more energetically, Russia started to appear. And from that moment on, military exercises with Russia, and I would say that became pretty much the norm, somewhere around 2014, 2015, when the original annexation of Crimea took place, and there was an idea that you can play off Russia and the West against each other. We have the trilateral military drill, Slavic brotherhood between Russia, Belarus, and Serbia began to be instituted. I think that military drills were frequently a way of sending political signals, of simply trying to scare the West with the Russian factor. So they were much more about political signaling and diplomatic leveraging and diplomatic balancing rather than about purely military and defense requirements.
And sometimes the media covered much more the exercises with the Eastern partners.
Of course, I mean, because of 1999, NATO alliance is unpopular, while on the other hand, because of its support to Serbia, because of Kosovo dispute, Russia popularity is high. So for political leadership, they believed it is better to give coverage to the exercises with the Russians, while on the other hand, not conceal from the public at large those who are much more numerous, the ones with the alliance. And of course, it was also part of this game of trying to frighten the West with the Russian card by instituting this idea that the Russians are everywhere. So that pretty much tells you the story about multinational exercises. When it comes to, for example, the multilateral peace missions, of course, there was this idea was behind all the talks about Serbia modernizing itself after 2000. The multinational missions were also part of this rubric. You have to have this flexible military which can take its place in participate in operation overseas, contribute to the collective security agenda. And pretty much a lot of the reforms which was done in the military in those immediate years after the overthrow of Milosevic's regime were directed towards this process. I mean, I remember even quite vividly, despite the fact that I was just someone who was beginning my undergraduate studies at that time, in between 2004 and 2007, a lot of expertly publications about how Serbian military can participate, for example, in NATO missions. I mean, during this time when Afghanistan was on the top of agenda, and I mean it was even. It is also very funny that I talk with many Serbian diplomats from that time and defense professionals who used to say to me, well, I remember back in those days we had official policy memos of the Serbian government where the word Euro-Atlantic integrations was not a dirty and naughty word. I mean, it became a naughty and dirty word after the 2008 and the independence of Kosovo, when counter-secessionism basically completely began to dominate Serbia's foreign and defense policy. And
yeah, those who were working, those people who were journalists at that time remembered that we were always using the word Euro-Atlantic integrations after the October 5th.
In between 2000 and 2007, and that declaration in Serbia's National Assembly on military neutrality, I mean, the word Euro-Atlantic and even NATO were not dirty words at all.
And the support was a bit higher in 2003, I guess.
A lot of higher. Some even spoke about the figure of 35, if we are to talk about 35% in the public opinion. I mean, today that is that equals science fiction of having those type of numbers today, of course. But at the same time, it was also during this period, for example, that as we all know, as probably most people here in this room know, Serbia is not a member of NATO, but it is part of NATO's Partnership for Peace program. And it exercises IPAP, Individual Partnership Action Plan, which is the highest form of cooperation that a non-member state can have with NATO alliance. There have been talks, of course, and there have been even offers of Serbia participating in now defunct NATO's mission in Afghanistan, ISAF, but there was a very simple reason why Serbian government turned that down. And the issue was that Serbia, according to its constitution and all the other legal documents and official policies, still treats Kosovo as part of its territory, but there is, of course, NATO mission in Kosovo, which is KFOR. So, I mean, from the standpoint of Serbian leadership participating in NATO's mission overseas, while you still have a NATO mission on territory which you still treat as your own, was considered as something of an unnatural act, so to speak. So they decided from that point on that Serbia does not participate in multinational peace operations, even with NATO, even when they are not done in the capacity of a NATO member state, but within NATO's Partnership for Peace program, and instead they focused on UN and EU missions. But ever since then, we occasionally would see some type of debate where they would say, oh, perhaps if we need to get closer to the Americans, then at least we can do them a favor and send perhaps some soldiers to some NATO mission, while on the other hand, those who are more engulfed in the policy of balancing would say, well, but that would anger the Russians, and so forth and so forth. So even something which would be left purely to the military professionals to handle, like multinational exercises, also began to be affected by the unresolved Kosovo dispute and this balancing act between Russia and the West, which came out of the unresolved Kosovo dispute.
Thank you. Andrej, we can see that North Macedonia has a significant representation in the NATO presence in its eastern flank. That might come as a surprise to many people in the region. What are the reasons and the logic behind this Skopje's decision?
It's very simple. We've been working... Yes, it is. I mean, we've been working tirelessly for years now to change the perception of the country from problem maker or from a subject of international relations into a participant in international relations. And we've been successful in doing so lately. I mean, Prespa Accord brought some of the change, but it has been a strategic orientation for the country to participate in foreign military missions abroad, even before we became NATO member. And that's because this is how we try to present ourselves from a beneficiary of military missions. I mean, since protective forces and preventive deployment in the early 90s until the beginning of the 2000s, or after the conflict in 2001, we've been a beneficiary of military missions. And this is our way of showing that we have changed and that we can actually contribute to peacekeeping abroad. So this is just a strategic orientation for the government. There is no need for digging behind too deep to find the actual reason. There is nothing more than being part of the change. I mean, if you see or if you look at the country on this being a participant in international relations, we are currently chairing OSCE. From the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we found out that we have put ourselves in the rotation system for a seat on the Security Council, which shows that the country is taking action and is becoming a participant in international relations, this included.
And what is the position of the public opinion in that sense? Have there been any voices?
There has never been any opposition to us participating in any of the foreign missions. I could actually say that it's quite the contrary. Many of the people that participated in most of our, in the foreign missions have contributed to substantially contributed to their household development or improvement, and they see it as actually as a benefit, as a way of contributing to the economy, if you like so. When you look into perception, there is actually perception about, for example, Kosovo, because we are prone to receive Russian propaganda through Serbia and Serbian media, and it's very easy for us to read and understand what's being reported. The population has, for example, the viewpoint of Serbia and of the Serbian community towards the bilateral issue between Serbia and Kosovo. But they have absolutely no problem in being part of KFOR, of the mission.
And what about the support? North Macedonia has been through a lot when it comes to the name change and what it has done to
it has affected EU because it's still unattainable. But in no way it has affected NATO and support for the alliance. There is, again, mostly because we receive the pro-Russian narrative, or we receive the pro-Russian narrative through the media. So there are those that try to explain the invasion to Ukraine or on Ukraine with 99 and what happened here, or try to argue that they have only themselves to blame, but these are just.
Or that this is a confrontation between the West and Russia. Or
that's not very much taken into the public discourse. We've actually we just did an analysis of the public discourse on social media for the whole of 2022, And we found out that of all of the political discussion or political and activist tweets, which are around 40,000 during the whole of the year, 7,000 are on the topic of Russia, Putin, and Ukraine. And when you go and dig deeper into that, you see that those that work as a factory, 5 people have produced 15% of all of the political communication on Twitter in North Macedonia last year, do hold that pro-Russian narrative, and they started even in January, using everything that Russia used as an explanation or argument for their invasion into Ukraine, translating it into Macedonian and putting it out there. But that's not the dominant position. There are still people that are very much supportive of Ukraine, and yeah, those that are part of the opposition, political opposition, see it as an opportunity saw it as an opportunity to benefit at the beginning, but they simply left that topic because there is also no political gain for them there if they pursue this narrative further. So there is much more understanding now than we had at the beginning, and there is a lot of compassion. If you look at the data, I think that we have actually by GDP, according to GDP, compared to GDP, we are one of the highest supporters of Ukraine when it comes to military equipment.
Thank you so
That's
much.
the benefit of being a poorer country.
Aryan, in Albania, the United States of America and Turkey are the biggest donors in the area of defense. So what is the role of international partnerships in the Albanian defense policy, and why are these two countries pointed out as partners of Tirana? What is their interest in that sense, and what is Tirana's interest?
Well, with regard to the United States, Albania's relation is kind of long-term, and it goes back to the post-World War I discussions in Versailles, where when the United States, through this Wilson principle of self-determination, sort of dissipated the discussions about the very existence of Albania as a nation. So that is something that has determined the course of relationship between Albania and I mean, from the Albanian perspective toward the United States. Now, Albania during communist period from 45, 46 until 91 severed the diplomatic relations with the U.S. But this did not affect this relationship that the Albanians had towards the United States. So when these relations were restored in 1991, the United States have remained the most important country for Albania in terms of foreign policy. Turkey is a different situation. The relation with Turkey dates to the same period of the post-communist period, but it relates mostly to the time when the war started in former Yugoslavia, and Albania was sort of looking for allies in the region. The course of the war was unpredictable. There was a policy of disengagement from the United States. It was just the end of the Cold War, and they were not seeing the possibility at the time of a war in Europe as a prominent. And so the story is known about this. And Albania was fearing that it would be left out of the cold, and with all this aging military capabilities from the Soviet period. So this was a time when Turkey sort of came in, and there was a kind of relationship that was built since then. In 2014, Turkey was declared in a way, and this relates also to the to the concept of strategic documents that I mentioned that are not so much important because by the government as a strategic partner. Now, even this is something that you don't know how strategism is defined, but yet Turkey has, for the last 30 years, been one of the countries that has constantly featured in the Albanian defense policies. And more recently, because of their development of defense industry, they have been able to enter into the market and even provide goods that can be even purchased with a more reasonable price compared to the products that are manufactured by the largest defense industries. So that is, in a way, in a nutshell, what explains this relation. But it's also political. There are close relationships between the politicians. I mean, the current prime minister often says that he is a very good friend with the Turkish president. So there is a lot of socialization in this that determines, in a way, this relationship. Now, Turkey is a large country. They have in the military missions abroad. Albania has continually participated since it was discussed earlier. It has been kind of its crown jewel in sense of contribution, international contribution to missions. It just sent since its mission in Bosnia after the Dayton Agreement to, I mean, now the numbers are smaller, but to when the presence in Afghanistan and Iraq were sort of removed, terminated, like 5,000 troops that has been rotated or more throughout the years, which has been a good opportunity for socializing. And because Albania did not have its own command structure, it was often embedded to other commands, like either Turkey or Germany or the United States. So Turkey very often kind of provided this command support, and that was another way how that kind of relationship in the defense sector has evolved. And also they have been donating often used military material and equipment to the Albanian defense ministry. So that is what explains, I could say, this kind of distinct relationship with the two countries.
Oh, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I wanted to add, it's not just the experience of Albania to have USA and Turkey as, well, this is not development aid, but military aid supply. For North Macedonia, the two countries are constant. And lately we've seen
You're talking about Turkey and the United States.
Yes. Lately we've seen the surgence of Norway. The last time that China supplied any form of aid to the military was in 2010 for the country. I cannot guess what was donated. Maybe it was computers at that time, but it was donated to the military, to the defense system in total. When you look into specific years, because for our International Impact Index, we track 64 countries, and Turkey and USA are part of those 64. I mean, there are plenty of more. When you look specific years, for example, if we take 2000 as the starting year, and then look the first year after the Bucharest veto and the visa liberalization with the EU, so 2009, 2010, and 2019, just before the pandemic, you'll see that Turkey represents 92% or accounts for 92% of all of the soldiers that were participating in military exercises in North Macedonia. So this speaks a lot. The only other area, well, the only other indicator that we are following, and where another strange country appears, it was for 2020, in the military diplomatic personnel, Russia appeared in the top 10. But that was in 2020, and since then, the situation has drastically changed.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know if I may ask you, is the United States, together with Turkey, the constant in this area? Are there any other countries that you have such a close cooperation with in this defense area?
Well, Albania has had that. That depends also on the priorities of the given country. I mean, for Turkey, the Balkans are a priority. So, this relationship should be understood as often as a reciprocated or not reciprocated relationship. So, it's not something that the countries of the region take the initiative. So, that is. To be taken into consideration. For instance, Italy has been very much active in the earlier periods, but for some point has withdrawn. So in a way, even if Albania would like to pursue, and still Italy remains its main trade partner and so on, but there is no reciprocation from the other side because defense, with its presence to provide either soft or support or harder. So that is actually the reason I could say why the United States and Turkey are or feature currently in this over the last year the main countries, because they have a more active security policy approach towards the region.
Thank you very much. Vuk, Serbian defense expenditure kept gradually rising since 2016, with the sharpest increase in 2021. So we also see that Serbian defense budget structure shows us that a large percentage is spent on arms and equipment. What is Serbia buying?
Well, I mean, on that point, I mean, I can tell you, and I was commenting with some people, I mean, if public opinion mood were to suddenly shift in favor of NATO membership, I mean, Serbia would already be considered in NATO circles a very good member, given that it already surpasses what is NATO's defense spending threshold of 2% of GDP. Serbia is the only one in the region which has surpassed NATO's threshold, somewhere around 2.3%.
And not even close to the NATO membership.
Yes, and of course, while of course we also had the recently Serbian president who announced that we might reach 3.5% of GDP. So I mean, of course, our president likes big numbers, but nevertheless, this also tells you something. And yes, it is also important because a lot of talk in recent years in NATO circles has been about the countries which have free-rided on United States security guarantees and who haven't respected spending the required 2% of GDP and fulfilling NATO's defense threshold. But of course, later on, what we actually found out was that that even those countries who did honor this 2% threshold were also frequently doing all sorts of bookkeeping and accounting tricks to achieve that 2% threshold. Some of them were fusing military pensions in order to reach that threshold. Some of them were fusing together defense and intelligence budgets to reach that 2% thresholds. I mean, if Serbia were to join, it would still be a very, very good fit on that hypothetical point. I mean, I'm just illustrating here because it spends on the category of weaponry on which NATO actually insists the most. It spends on procuring new equipment and new weaponry. Now, of course, I have to stress, I mean, of course, we have seen that Serbia was not particularly picking on from where it was getting its weaponry. I mean, we had a combination of both purchases and donations from Russia. We had, of course, even big purchases from China. I mean, those were the first purchases of defense purchases of its kind by a European country of a Chinese equipment. I'm referring to drones and also to missile defense systems. We have seen also high-profile purchases from the French, where we had the Mistral missiles, as well as now talks about Rafale jets replacing the Russian outdated MiGs. And we also see from time to time also talks about buying Bayraktar drones from Turkey and Spike missiles from Israel. I mean, we don't know the fate of these transactions, but these are just some of the things. And of course, not to mention the kamikaze drones from United Arab Emirates, which were also announced from that defense expo by the president recently.
If I'm not mistaken, we have heard more than once from Serbian president that the Western countries are not actually prone to selling us arms, or.
Well, I mean, who knows? I mean, well, there might be those type of elements, but of course we can also, but we can frame it also differently. I mean, because the usual narrative when it comes to Serbia's arms acquisition was the one of a regional arms race, sorry, particularly with Croatia. But I think that we can actually, if we dig deeper into it, I think that we can find perhaps a more accurate description of what guides these weapons procurement. Number one, it is part of Serbia's foreign policy, where of course you believe if you have good weaponry in your arsenal, then you can get a better bargain on a regional dispute such as Kosovo. That's number one. Number two, there is this belief that perhaps I think this is something of a residue from Tito's Yugoslavia, that if you have a formidable army, then your ability to balance and have autonomy vis-a-vis more powerful countries increases. And at the same time, this weaponry can also be a tool of boosting your own bilateral political relationship with the country which you need at a certain point in time. I mean, the purchase of Mistral jets from France fits with this landmark visit by President Macron to Belgrade back in 2019, when Paris emerged as Belgrade's primary political partner in Western Europe. Then, of course, when you need when you need to improve your relationship with Ankara, you can say we will buy Bayraktar drones. And of course, when you need something from Israel, like for example their pressure groups in Washington D.C., then you will start negotiating on purchasing Spike missiles. So frequently for Serbia, these weapons are, as I like to say, these are not necessarily instruments of destruction, but tools of political power play. And at the same time, there is, of course, another very powerful force which we should also not forget, which is the issue of domestic politics in the country. By all public opinion polls, the Serbian armed forces are among society's institutions which are most admired by the Serbian citizens, second only to the Serbian Orthodox Church. So there is this very powerful culture which equates...
and it's a constant.
It's a constant. I mean, also, for example, I mean, when you ask people, should the military conscription service mandatory conscription service be reinstated, the majority of them says yes, and majority states not the reason of potential security threats in the environment, but they say that this is part of Serbian value system, that this is what turns boys to men, and so forth and so forth. So this is very powerful. So if you are seen as investing, of course, in your armed forces, then you score a lot of domestic mileage. Of course, there are other problems, but this one we cannot go into details for the precise reason that we don't know what is happening, and that is one of the major problems, a problem of non-transparency. So I mean, we don't know whether how the budgets are being planned. Sometimes we don't know, I mean, based on what criteria these weapons are being bought, and whether they conceal some other problems which might exist in the Serbian armed forces. Like, for example, a problem which has been reported by the Serbian Military Union for years now, which is a departure of Serbia's professional military personnel who are departing armed forces because they are unhappy with the conditions that they are being provided. So. But I can only conclude, because I know that we are in a hurry and others have to say their piece as well, of course, all of other colleagues. I'm not afraid of war in the Balkans, but I am afraid when these weapons acquisition are poison the already fractured political trust among local states.
And let's talk about North Macedonia's ambitions when it comes to the arms procurement. What systems are of essence for the country's security, and what should North Macedonia acquire?
This is again tied to being one of the poorer countries of the alliance. So when compared to to the other member countries, our budget was planned to hit 2% this year. Due to COVID and the economic crisis, due to the invasion and the necessity to divert funds, the current budget is at 1.75. The plan of the Ministry of Defense is to hit 2% next year, provided that nothing happens and destroys the plan or prevents the implementation of that plan. Again, when you're a poor country, you need to think about not investing heavily into the defense, but doing smart defense. And this approach is taken by the government. So the strategy is to use the participation in military missions abroad to explore the capacities and learn about the strengths of the whole defense system, and then smartly invest in what's necessary. The new strategic defense review will be approved recently, I hope. At least that's what the ministry plans. And if we are to use last year's experience, the approval of the annual plan for procurement for the military took place in April. So let's hope that by beginning of April we will have everything in place so that we know what are we going to invest in this year. As if we go back to last year, the plan was to have 8 projects implemented for procurement of military equipment. This went along with the plan for modernization of the army, light armored vehicles, special vehicles for special purposes, artillery systems, 105 millimeters, and ammunition, air defense systems for very low altitudes, equipment for reconnaissance of and intelligence, and joint fire control kit JTAC. That was according to the annual plan for 2002. My expectation is that we continue in this regard. And as Vuk spoke just before, the approach of the government in this regard is to go along with the strategic partnership with the US mainly, but then again establish and boost, well, establish, we already have bilateral relations, we are allies after all, but boost the relations with specific member countries through military equipment supply. France is then a country that has been recently added to the list, and this is where I guess we are going to experience new equipment supply.
Do you think that the situation with Russian invasion changed that a bit, changed the perspectives, or maybe shifted the priorities?
Not really, because we already had in place many of the plans, and we went along with what we had. It was high time for us to dispose of some of the equipment that went to Ukraine, mainly the outdated and Russian-produced or Eastern-produced tanks went to Ukraine. So this is going along with how it was already envisioned and planned.
Arjan, if I'm not mistaken, it is quite noticeable that Albania's defense budget remains the least transparent in this region, and the general availability of the information proved to be problematic to acquire during this latest research. So how do you perceive the defense sector transparency? Are there any challenges or issues you would like to underline?
Yes, well, this remains a general issue because transparency, as we understand it, has not become yet something of self-evident practical thing. It's just, and you can see even when you engage with this kind of requests, asking about different information, you'd get the responses, citations from the laws. I mean, that law said that. So when you ask how this is done, usually you get articles of the law, what the law says. So this is a big practical problem that is not only in the defense sector in Albania, but also across the different other agencies. So it's a public administration problem in general. The reason why this has not been consolidated, such a practice, I can say there are different reasons, but also one of the reasons is also corruption, because there is a lot of corruption in public administration, and often this kind of requests for information, they are understood as putting pressure to uncover, like there is a lot of investigative journalism going on. So it has not improved. I think that Albania could have, at least the defense sector could have had some improvement after it joined NATO, but it has not been the case. I mean, Albania was a country which, for the first time in 2018, conducted this defense integrity assessment by Transparency International, although this was sort of something a bit mandatory within the NATO integrity building program. So that is this is an issue that needs to be addressed in order to make this to make information more available by the defense sector in general in Albania. So that could be my explanation for this. It's just a legacy. So transparency initially was related to a lack of transparency to secrecy. Then it was sort of mixed with corruption, and then it sort of got stuck there.
But it's not focused only on the defense sector. It is
no, it's a general. I think it's a general problem of public administration to be proactively, first of all, transparent, to publish most of information. And in the discussions that we often have, I indicate, for instance, the UK Ministry of Defence or US or even Canadian Ministry of Defence that they are supposedly having more issues or more secrets in a way in terms of defense capabilities, and yet they are more transparent. So it's not something that by withholding information that sort of preserves or serves better the public interest. So this balance has yet to be properly understood and interpreted by the public administration in general in Albania, including the defense sector.
Mm-hmm. Since we still have some time, I would like to invite you to ask questions if you want to partake in this discussion. And until then, I have the question for all three of you. I'm guessing that all of the countries in the Western Balkans experience similar, if not the same, challenges. So I think Vuk briefly spoke about this next question and the situation in Serbia. So, but may I ask you, so is the military misused for daily politics in your countries? Are there any examples of misusing the military issues or defense issues in the daily politics?
Not in the last 5 years.
How come?
How come? I think that first, the last time that maybe it was only part of folklore. We were never able to prove that, or if someone succeeded in proving that, it was probably not disclosed to the public. But the last time that the military was part of the public discourse and discussion in, well, abuse of political power was back in 2016, in the darkest days of Gruevski in North Macedonia.
What happened then?
There were discussions that the president might use his powers to proclaim emergency situation, or and then use the military to prevent the transfer of power. This was end of 2016, the first half of 2017, just before the coup in the parliament at the end of April. And since then, the situation has drastically changed. I can still say that even at that time, there was big trust in the military, and in the capacity to perform, or in the capacity to support the system. The distrust at that time was mostly diverted to politicians and to parts of the political elite. At this moment, I would just say that, again, the Ministry of Defense has been the most transparent ministry of the government for the last 3 years. And the public support and trust in the military, in the armed forces, is still high as it was before.
Arjen, what about Albania?
Well, it depends on what you have in mind. I mean, the military, even when it comes to abuses of human rights and so on, has never been like an institution that has engaged in such practices in Albania. I could say even during the communist period. So, but then if you want to see, for instance, one I could recall abuse was like a symbolic gesture of rolling armored personnel carriers in the streets of Tirana to declare the COVID, for instance. I mean, there was nothing in relation to COVID with rolling APCs in the streets, just to show people that if you don't obey to the rules, then, I mean, that was kind of visual. I could say the recent thing that I could recall that I could say misuse, because there was no clear explanation of what their role was to sort of be put out of the barracks, but can also suggest when it comes to the relationship between the military and the political establishment of the dialogue. I mean, obviously there was no resistance from the military to say, okay, but what is in it for us to go out on the streets? I mean, just to declaring COVID.
That was just in the beginning, I guess.
Yeah, of course, but that is, I could say, a political abuse that comes to my mind, if I could say.
Well, I guess a slightly different situation here in Serbia.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, as I said, here in recent years, the military has become something. I would say, perhaps, probably unwillingly. If I haven't talked with military professionals, but I presume that sometimes they don't feel comfortable about this. But frequently, part of the electoral dynamics and the electoral campaigns. So, on that point, like part of the electoral promotion, particularly in the context of Kosovo dispute.
And how big is the role of the military in internal affairs of your country? Let's start with you.
Not very significant. I mean, as I just listened to what Arjen spoke about the COVID times, yes, the military was involved in managing the situation, not managing the situation directly, but assisting medical personnel and assisting emergency workers to maintain the order or support the whole system with the functioning, but it's not. It has not been abused in any way.
And Arjen, I guess it's the same situation in Albania, based on what you previously said.
Yeah, well, I mean, because there's, I mean, depending on the time in consideration, but one, for instance, other incident or misuse I could call, speaking of internal involvement in internal affair, it's been like a bit more than a decade that we had some riots, political riots, and there was an engagement of defense intelligence agencies into internal affairs. Now, these things you don't know until this becomes, in a way, public, but these kind of walls are not so very clearly defined in the countries of our region. So it's not always, I mean, we just can't describe from what we see.
Since we have 5 more minutes, if there are no questions, I would like to reflect on one part of the report. So compared to the previous one, MODs have made progress in the area of collecting data and reporting on the representation of women in defense systems based on requests for access to information of public importance. Albania and Croatia are the only 2 countries that have almost reached the NATO commitment of 15% of female members of the uniformed armed forces. In the remaining countries, women make up between 8 and 10% of the military personnel. However, Albania is the only one that has a quota for women in the army, which stands at 15%, which could influence further admission of women into the armed forces. So why is this area of the report important?
Well, I mean, of course, it is important. First, I have to stress something. I mean, this part of the report was done by my dear colleague, Maja Bieloš. I mean, she's our expert on women and defense. So, I mean, what my knowledge on this topic cannot even stand as a footnote compared to her own. But when it comes to, of course, representation of women in the defense systems, I mean, the situation remains pretty much like it did last year, uneven, so to speak, when it comes to the implementation. I mean, for all the countries, pretty much the bedrock of the campaign to introduce women into the defense system remains the UN Resolution 1325, Peace, Women and Security. That pretty much remains the bedrock of this policy. However, we have seen that it appears that the outcomes are uneven and that some countries fare better on some metrics while the other ones fare poorer. And so, I mean, I think that this probably has to do with the fact that the defense systems are so caught up in other problems that sometimes this issue gets sidelined, although I think it probably I mean, we can also take into account the example of a very successful military, where actually female representation is not that much of a problem. I'm referring to Israel, of course. So, I mean, this is not an issue of efficiency, but but for example, we can just take a look at some of these data, for example. When it comes to the percentage of women in command and leadership position, this ranges 4 to 8% in the region. Croatia did better on this point. There are 12% of women in command positions. For example, Serbia has been more successful when it comes to the percentage of women who participate in multinational peace missions, but it is, for example, the only country in the region which hasn't appointed female defense minister so far. So the image remains uneven, and there is plenty of work to go. But I can also say that despite all the troubles, I still can say that those who want to see improvement here, they also will find that the MODs are not as unenthusiastic as one might think. I mean, I think that there is also this notion that they also like the idea of reaching out to the full potential of society and having more women in the defense systems. Of course, the desires and words have to be matched by actions, but this is, of course, the image that we have seen so far.
And Arin, is there anything you would like to add, given the fact that that Albania was the country that almost reaches this goal of 15% of women representation?
Yes, there's been a lot of affirmative action in Albania to promote women into, generally in the society, to mainstream gender. There is now the majority of the government are women, and the parliament there have been quotas introduced in the party list to allow women to be part of the parliament. Similarly, in the police and the armed forces. So this is the result actually of women now being increased in number. But yet, I think we generally have a cultural problem when it comes to women. We conduct this security barometer, and this year we dedicated a whole chapter to women in security sector. And while we were asking questions about how much people supported the idea, and they were so much in support, but then a question we asked about how much they think that women are adequate for this position, and the figure is like staggeringly negative, 80%, including women. They are not adequate. So there is a very high degree of masculinism in the society, which, despite the affirmative action, when it comes to the substance, I think it's yet lots to be done. So figures are something, but then they should be also dug deeper to have a better understanding.
Andrea, any final remarks?
Well, when speaking on women and women participation, we did a study on to see women participation in political TV debates. This is not very applicable to defense, but what we found is really, really impressive. On average, over 1,000 episodes of political TV debates, 25% of speakers, of guests, were women. The topic that was considered as most female was gender equality, which should be not, or not be. And when we speak about foreign and security policy, only 16% of guests invited were women, which shows that people don't necessarily look at women as experts in the field. This creates the whole public perception and the acceptance of what Arjan just spoke. We don't necessarily see women as fitting to be part of the defense, although we have had 2 ministers of defense women already. The former one and the current one are the 2 women so far that have served in that position. But this goes back to traditions, perceptions, which I would hope to see them gone soon, very soon.
Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen, for your expertise, for your time, and for your remarks. This is where we take a short break. Thank you so much for your attention. We are continuing, I think, in 15 minutes.
papir. Good afternoon, and welcome to the second session of today's conference, where we're going to be discussing the public perception of the regional relations. On the first panel, we have heard some hard data and some facts about how the relation stands at this point. But as you know, it is at least as equally important how do these relations look like in the public perception, public eye, because it also influences the political decision-making process, and it also informs us about how the citizens are informed about these processes. My name is Luka Šterić. I'm a researcher at BCSP. And before I present my fellow panelists today, let me just briefly give you a glimpse about what we're going to be discussing today. So, as you know, and as you heard in the first panel, we have seen a rather bleak picture of the regional relations in the last few years, which is probably, I mean, the region is dealing with probably some of the most difficult security threats that we have seen since the probably 1990s. We have seen, hopefully, the peak of the conflicts and tensions in the Kosovo, especially in North Kosovo, but also in the south of Kosovo. We've seen some very difficult situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We have seen the rise of political polarization and tensions in Montenegro as well. We have seen some tensions in North Macedonia, especially over the French proposal. So across the region, we see security threats multiplying and being very, very difficult to deal with for all these countries. So actually, what we are discussing today is the annual report about the regional relations that the BCSP is doing every year. And among other questions, we are discussing here some of the most burning issues when it comes to the regional relations, especially when it comes to the fears of citizens of Serbia about the potential conflicts in the region, what are the views of the public about the bilateral relations in the region, and then finally about the regional cooperation as well. And as you know, with these current circumstances, these questions are more important than ever to answer. So to help us make sense of this all, we have three distinguished panelists, my colleague and fellow researcher, Ivan Ranković, who's going to be sharing with us some of the data and conclusions that we have found in this study, published just now, called War Echoes, Intensify Fears. Welcome. And we have two distinguished panelists helping us see these issues from the eyes of the region. Two professors, but also professionals in the field, practitioners, I would say. Ms. Leila Ramić-Mesihović, who is the president of the Foreign Affairs Council of the member of the BiH presidency. Welcome. And Ms. Olivera Injac, former Minister of Defense of the Republic of Montenegro, and also Vice President of Europe Now movement. Welcome. So let's start with the most burning issue and the elephant in the room, if you will. Once again, the war is dominating the public discourse across the region. Not that it ever left, to be honest, but now more than ever it is a burning issue. And with the war in Ukraine and also all these threats that we have just mentioned, I would say that we have concluded that the wars have intensified in Serbia. So maybe if you would want to share with us, how do citizens of Serbia perceive these relations, and what do they see as the most pressing issues and maybe the potential threats to the potential conflict in the Balkans?
Thank you for that question. One of the main findings of the survey is that there is a significant increase of fear among Serbian citizens, fear of the possibility of conflict outbreak in the Balkans in the next 5 years. And if we compare the results from this year's survey to the survey that we conducted in 2020 on the same representative sample, we can see that in 2020, more than half of Serbian citizens were not afraid of the possible conflict at all, while in 2022, 1/3 of citizens were not afraid at all or mostly not afraid of the possibility of conflict outbreak in the Balkans. So the real question is, why such change? And there are many reasons behind this. Definitely one of the main reasons is the ongoing war in Ukraine, which raised concerns that the war could spill over into the Balkans. But also what we found interesting is that there's inflammatory rhetoric used by political leaders in the region, and that rhetoric with threats about potential interethnic conflicts, that also contributes to this kind of rise of fear of the potential conflict. And when talking about possibility of conflict outbreak, we also asked the citizens what are the possible causes of those conflicts. And 2/3 believe that it is likely that the conflict over in the Balkans could happen over the status of Kosovo. So mostly Serbian citizens relate the possible cause of the conflict with the status of Kosovo. And bearing in mind that recent tensions between Belgrade and Pristina and also violent incidents, it is not surprising that such a high number of Serbian citizens see status of Kosovo as the potential cause. But besides that, there are also great powers, more specifically the NATO and Russia, fighting over the dominance in the Balkans. That is also one of the causes of conflict that Serbian citizens identified. But also political and ethnic tensions in the countries where Serbian people live, for example, in Bosnia and Herzegovina and Montenegro, people raised some concerns about the situation there, but they mostly agreed that it is unlikely that the conflict would break out in those countries. I would just like to add one more thing, that we can see that from this year's survey, there was also an increase of the willingness of Serbian citizens to support Serbian military intervention in the countries of the region where Serbian people live, especially if the Serbian people are in some kind of danger or at risk. And we see that from the results from the survey in 2020, we see that around 20% is the increase of people who support this kind of military intervention in case the Serbian people are at risk. And what is, I will finish with this, what is really interesting is that despite the fact that there is increase in readiness and willingness of military intervention in the countries if Serbian people are at risk, and despite the fact that there is increase of fear of potential conflict, this year we also saw that there is actually a decrease in support of a reintroduction of mandatory military service in Serbia. And we see the drastic change actually, because from the survey in 2020, this idea of reintroduction of mandatory military service was supported by 3/4 of the respondents, while this year slightly more than half think that mandatory military service should be reintroduced. And this drastic change can be explained perhaps by the fact that now the citizens are seeing that there is a possibility of real security threat, and therefore they are not really willing to reintroduce this kind of measure.
Let me just ask you, this increase in the willingness of Serbian people to support the military intervention if in case Serbs are attacked, is it equal among all cases? I mean, Kosovo and Bosnia and Herzegovina and Montenegro, or do you see any differences in this?
Thank you for that question. No, the support of military intervention in Kosovo is much higher than in the Bosnia and Herzegovina and Montenegro. Actually, the negative responses, so people think that the negative responses prevail in these two countries, Bosnia and Herzegovina and Montenegro. So only in Kosovo, there are many people who say that they would support if Serbia military intervenes in Kosovo in case Serbian people are at risk or threatened.
Yeah, thank you. As you can see, it is very different how people see the situation in Kosovo and Bosnia and Herzegovina and Montenegro. But although Serbian public maybe doesn't focus so much on the situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina when it comes to the potential threat of the violence and conflicts, international community definitely does, and probably people in Bosnia and Herzegovina as well. And we have seen on the very first day of the war, the number of EUFOR troops doubled actually in Bosnia, and many people are kind of going public with fears of maybe this conflict in Ukraine potentially kind of spilling over to Bosnia and Herzegovina. So from the eyes of the Bosnian and Herzegovina public, how does the regional relations look like, and especially in Bosnia and Herzegovina, these tensions? Is there an increased fear of conflict there?
Thank you. Thank you for having me here today. For the sake of the inside truth, and the devil is always in the details, especially in Bosnian politics, I don't chair the Council for Foreign Affairs for the entire presidency, just for one presidency member, Denis Bečirović. Yes, so, okay. Well, when it comes to fear, we speak about affect, and it's been written a lot in theory also about theory of affect. You cannot rationalize it entirely. But in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we are deeply traumatized society. We have plenty of wounds. And, you know, many of the fears have been generated through these nasty experiences from the past that have now been transferred from a generation to a generation. You know, when you have such a bad war as we had less than 3 decades ago, fear is something that you live with, regardless of whether you want it or not. So this is something that we all have in Bosnia. And now, you know, because of all of this pressure, internal pressure, we have plenty of the best of us, the youngest of us leaving the country in increasing numbers. And, you know, the things regarding the rhetorics is always underestimated as a factor. You know, when you have this aggressive rhetorics, for example, from Zagreb, and the president over there who advises kindly Bosnians to use first soap, then perfume when wanting to make a decision. Or when you have these repetitive denials of the country, of different identities or certain identities within the country. When you have this, when you face this constant urge of some groups of people to humiliate the country, to humiliate what we are and what we stand for, then these things don't only affect our dignity, they also make us even a bit more afraid than we normally are. So we are very cautious. The country has significantly changed demography-wise, politically-wise, over the past 3 decades. And we are now somewhat a changed society, a complex society, but a society that does exist, does have perceptions. A country that does exist is the second biggest economy in the region. And with economy that is rather resilient, surprisingly enough, with, yes, very complex, complex state structure, but with a system that functions unless there are blockages introduced by political elites. In absence of blockages, we do see periods of extremely good functioning of the state. And when we see blockages, these also trigger fears of different sorts among the people. It's not necessarily an armed conflict. It could also be a fear of implosion of a country, of gradual, disintegration of the country sponsored by not only forces from within, but forces from outside the country as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Olivera, Leila has mentioned the inflammatory rhetoric as especially important when it comes to the rise of fear of citizens as well as Ivana. We have seen Montenegro in the last 3 years, especially after the regime change and just before the regime change, the rise of polarization in society, especially political polarization and even ethnic polarization, I would say, and the rise of these discourses about, you know, conflicts, maybe not armed conflicts, maybe not on the same level as in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but definitely people, at least when we were in Podgorica a couple of times talking to people, they do express some fears of potential conflicts among citizens. So how do the citizens of Montenegro see the conflict, potential conflict in the region, and also within the Montenegro society, these divisions, how do they echo actually, especially concerning the ongoing war in Ukraine?
Thank you for the invitation, and it's really great honor to discuss about these issues. I will try to solve different type of analysis, because recently Since May 2022, I was in the position of the Minister of Defense of Montenegro, and what was really excellent experience. And from that point of view, I will give you some thoughts and ideas, but also I will speak from the point of view of from academia and from the political position which I cover now. Actually, definitely one thing I will agree with all three speakers, definitely political narratives drive public perception in our countries. Montenegro is proper case. I will not agree with you. You mentioned the old, new political polarization. Actually, that's the old one. From 1997, we have one religious unresolved issue regarding relations between Serbian Orthodox Church and Montenegrin Orthodox Church. Actually, there is potential from two political point of view to discuss all these issues. And for example, if you have aggressive rhetoric coming from Serbia and from other regional authoritarian leaders, or I don't know which explanation to use, then you have immediately in public discourse the changes and rhetoric which is very aggressive and causes a lot of political tensions in our country. In last two and a half years, after definitely the power has changed in our country, and after 30 years, that change causes, I would say, confusion in the society and citizens, which definitely don't know where to belong to, Montenegrin or Serbian identity. And we are multicultural society, and we have minorities, Albanians, Bosniaks, and so on and so called. So this is a very, very complex society. And if you put, for example, rhetoric, which sounds like between political opponents, I will be honest, which is normally used for daily political interests, then definitely it causes, I would say, not a fear, but type of uncomfortable feelings in our society that people do not know what to expect. Will Serbia or any other country which is bigger than Montenegro, what is definitely not difficult to be bigger, it's 600,000 population, so very small. And our colleague from Macedonia mentioned the poor defense system. I will not agree. Definitely, the Montenegrin is more worse than North Macedonia. So, what I would like to say, from the point of view of Montenegrin citizen, I speak as a politician. They are very tired of political issues. Our political party conducted in the last 2-3 months a big survey, and you know what citizens put in first 2 or 3 the hot issues they want to see in our country. All of them belong to socio-economic sphere. It is the issue of employment or unemployment, which is a really big high rate of unemployment in Montenegro. The other one is economic benefits of their life, because we had in last year the salaries has been raised, and definitely it was the result of the work of my 2 colleagues from the political movement which I belong to, Europe Now. They raised the salaries in Montenegro first time after almost 20 years. It was like ordinary salary. It was 150 euros, 22 euros. You can imagine it was 100% raised, and it definitely causes more stability, more prosperity in the society, and the people feel more relaxed and enthusiastic. So if I may say, this type of political security issues and religious issues, which are very present, I would say they are used as aggressive rhetoric by politicians and political opponents, doing their everyday fight, and it causes unrealistic fear, I would say, because mainly if you give that people to work and give them opportunity for prosperity in Montenegro, and especially we had the brain drain, for example, last decades. if they stay in Montenegro, then they want to invest, to live better, and probably these new generations are not very enthusiastic about the conflicts and about the fear. They're enthusiastic about the future and about the modernity of our society.
Thank you. Maybe this is a good segue into the discussion about the bilateral relations, and maybe let's start with the Montenegro-Serbia bilateral relations. Ivana, we have done this research as well, these questions about the Montenegro-Serbian relations, and especially in the light of this basic agreement between the Montenegrin country and the Serbian Orthodox Church. How do citizens of Serbia see the relations now, and do they see any change in their perception? Do we actually see any change in their perception about these relations?
It is good that we brought this topic now, so I will mainly try to stick with the results from the survey. So one of the main issues that raised ethnic tensions between Serbia and Montenegro is the signing of the fundamental agreement between the Serbian Orthodox Church and Montenegrin government. And when we asked the citizens whether they believe that signing of the agreement improved the relations between the two countries, every third citizen said that they believe there is an improvement due to the signing of the agreement. But what is actually interesting is that 2 years ago, actually in 2020, when we did the survey, 1/3 perceived the conflict between the Serbian Orthodox Church and the Montenegrin government as an ethnic motivated conflict. But that is 1/3, and half of the citizens believed that it is not actually ethnic motivated conflict, but mostly it is a conflict about material assets and political influence. Nowadays we see it more as an ethnic issue, so that is also one interesting data. And well, even though this political crisis was resolved with signing of the agreement, still citizens obviously do not really see it as an event that improved the relations between the two countries. I would not go more into details.
So only 1/3 of citizens actually see it as a major improvement, which is kind of surprising when you think about how much it dominated, at least in Serbia, the public discourse about the Serbian-Montenegro relations. And this was kind of a central topic, so obviously didn't really change much of the mindset, at least until now, in Serbian public.
What is positive, I would say, because it's good that people doesn't perceive that as a potential for conflict, because that's something what was lost for long period of time. It's fating that this type of agreement between the Serbian Orthodox Church and Montenegrin government be signed, because with the other religious communities, it was signed agreements. So this one was solved, and in Montenegro it causes a lot of turbulences. We can discuss when it was.
Yeah, maybe we can discuss it now. Actually,
yeah, okay. It causes turbulences. We had two governments in last 2 years and a half, and the last one was voted in the parliament and trust because of the signing agreement. Of the government, 43rd government of Prime Minister Dritan Bandović. And you can imagine for 6 months we have technical mandate of government, but it's actually really difficult to manage all the governance in our country. But I will return to discuss about this. It was really, it causes a lot of political tensions in that moment, because the agreement was signed without any preparations in public, no public debates, or any of the political opponents have been informed. And the Prime Minister and some of the ministers decided that it be organized, I would say, without any open discussion or informing publicity. So it has happened immediately, and then it causes a lot of political public discourse was very difficult to solve during the summer, to follow actually, because there were plenty of bad and dirty words used between the opponents, and it definitely causes in our society between Montenegrins who belong to Serbs Orthodox Church and Montenegrin Orthodox Church, a lot of, I would say, disagreements, because two political opponent blocs or coalitions had plenty of bad words and aggressive rhetorics in our public discourse, in media and everywhere. So it causes, I would say, this type of narratives could potentially have negative effects on the public perception of the citizens of Montenegro. How do they see relations with the Serbia? Because I think it's very important for the Montenegro as the smallest country in the region, and of course because of the economic and other type of links with the Serbia, cultural and so on, so forth, to have good bilateral relations. But of course that Serbian government admire actually our position in NATO, because Montenegro is NATO member and candidate states for EU. So for that point of view, that political level is important to be progressive and to respectful. But of course that publicity need to understand all these processes and to be, better managed. That's what I see the position of political parties now in the parliament of Montenegro. I would say they are not very active in that field to work on reconciliation and to better understanding. I would say that they more work on division in our society than to work in reconciliation and good relations. So for future relations with Serbia is important to have much better and stability in our parliament and majority, which can provide economic and prosperous stability for Montenegro, and that probably will make influence on our bilateral relations with the neighbors, not only with Serbia, but also with Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, North Macedonia, and others.
We're going to be closely following how this topic is going to be discussed in the upcoming presidential elections campaign. Let's turn now to the Bosnia and Herzegovina-Serbia bilateral relations, which is, of course, very much dominated by and maybe burdened by the topic of the special relations between Republika Srpska and Serbia. And this topic is, at least in the Serbian public, the most dominant one. So maybe, Ivana, you could first share with us how do citizens see these relations, especially with Republika Srpska, and then generally with Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Thank you. The status of the Republic of Srpska is always the main topic when talking about relations between Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. So what we asked this year, like the previous years, is whether Serbian citizens support the idea of Republic of Srpska separating from Bosnia and Herzegovina and integrating to Serbia. And this year, 1/3 believed that the Republic of Srpska should separate from Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is a decrease in support. So in 2020, this idea had greater support that the Republic of Srpska should join Serbia, let's say. And this data is actually completely in line with the other results that I was talking about, because due to this increase of fear of potential conflict, we can say that the citizens probably feel that it is dangerous to raise this issue of redrawing the borders again. So we find this result not really surprising. But what is surprising is that only 4% of citizens see that integration of the Republic of Srpska as a compensation, that it would be an acceptable condition it would be condition under which Serbia could agree to the independence of Kosovo. So
kind of shifting
shifting. So like separation of
again,
Republic of Srpska and integration with Serbia as a compensation to the independence of Kosovo. Only 4% of citizens support this idea, which is also a decline in support from the survey in 2020. And this can actually be explained by the fact that in the previous 2 years, the main focus was mostly on Kosovo and security crisis in Kosovo and therefore potential solutions, but not really, the focus wasn't really on Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Leila, as you may probably understand, this is a question that we ask because this is a topic that dominates the Serbian public discourse over the last 20 years probably, and also the public discourse in Republika Srpska. So in that sense, I guess, of course, coming from Sarajevo, you have a very different views of this, of course, but I'm just curious about how do you see this shift in perception of the Serbian public, because usually what you hear in media in Bosnia and Herzegovina, especially also in Serbia as well, that this topic is kind of unilaterally supported by the Serbian citizens, as if it's like only a question of the political context in which it is not possible. But as we can see, maybe the Serbian public doesn't really support this much as maybe it is perceived by both of the publics.
Well, maybe not perceived, but to the maximum extent exploited by certain political elites, I'd say. Well, maybe this will come as a surprise, but I'm a dual citizen of this country and of Bosnia and Herzegovina as well. And my mother was born in Belgrade. She's from here. So the two countries lean on one another forever. We are passionate about one another. One is more passionate than the other about certain parts of the other. There are extent to which you can basically pry on other people's territories. And when you ask if it is acceptable to compensate anything with any part of Bosnia, I just would like to know how, why, who compensates, who makes the decision. I mean, it's a bit absurd.
This was a discourse dominated by.
And I think that most of the interviewees or people who did take part in the survey do agree with me then. Okay, so it's not special relations, it's parallel relations between the two, as defined in the Dayton Peace Accord. And, it's been sitting there since 1995, this option, and it's being used rather well, not so much in quality rather than in quantity, I'd say. I would like to say these parallel connections bringing more benefits to the people of Bosnia and Herzegovina, especially to the part of the country it is related to. I would like to say that support and assistance and the fruitfulness of these parallel relations contributed to what the official rhetoric's been, and that is support of sovereignty and territorial integrity of Bosnia and Herzegovina. We are sensitive, like we have these sensors all around us, because, we have never attacked anybody, for quite some time now. Maybe not since the 14th century or something. And even then, we were, expanding by marrying people to people, or buying land. Bosnians and Herzegovinians now more than ever seem to be apart from one another to an extent. And the social cohesion is not what we used to have before the war. But, we are not the only plural country in the world. We are not the only country with this kind of challenges in the world. We are a country doing rather well off, given the fact that we are still a subject of at least one, I say two, crisis management instruments. This is also not for nothing. There is a reason behind. What I'd like to say, my country getting to really quickly is becoming independent in decision making, people being articulate and clear about the common interests, and there is more than one, there is more than few. We all want to see good economy, we all want our children to go to good schools, we all want a good healthcare system. And these are the things that basically should be the common ground of the country that I want to continue living with, or living in the future that I see before me. That's why I've taken this position. It's not like I was not busy before that, you know, busy enough. It's one of the reasons why I became a political scientist a couple of decades ago. You know, it's simply something that I believe in, or you know, I don't have anything else to believe in. This is not my previous homeland has already been torn apart and taken away from me. I don't want to give my second one so easily. Thank you.
This narrative about the exchange of territories was something that Milorad Dodik especially has run by in the last few campaigns, so this is why it was also very prominent in the Serbian public. This is why we also asked this question to measure these trends. But maybe we should now shift to the regional cooperation, if you would say so. And the one topic that has dominated the most in Serbian media, although there are other regional cooperation mechanisms such as the Berlin Process, but the one that has dominated the most was Open Balkan Initiative, and it was seen as a kind of brainchild of President Vučić and Edi Rama especially, but also the current government of Montenegro, or of Macedonia, or the last one actually. So in that sense, how do the citizens of Serbia see this Open Balkan Initiative? Do they actually know about it, and how much do they know about it, and do they support it, and why? Why? And also, if you can add to this, how does this reflect on relations with other countries in the region, especially Albania, which we have seen the major difference in the perception?
Yes, the Open Balkan Initiative was really in focus, especially last year. Actually, last year was the first year of this initiative with its new name. It was previously known as Mini Schengen. And what we have noticed last year is that the Open Balkan Initiative was present in the media a lot, and especially those events and meetings of the three leaders of the countries that launched the initiative. And because, for example, there was the International Wine Fair, which received a lot of media attention. And we believe that because of that media attention, which was successful, I would say, because of that, many citizens of Serbia are now more aware of the fact that this initiative exists. Because in 2020, when we did the survey, yes, actually, in 2022, now the number of citizens that are familiar with the initiative has doubled. So I will not focus really on the figures. All the figures will be in the publication that is published on our website. So the citizens are more aware of this initiative. However, we believe that the results of this initiative are still missing. Publicly visible results, tangible results. We concluded that because during the survey we did this year, we realized when we asked the citizens why do they support the Open Balkan Initiative, most of them said that they support it because of the regional economic cooperation, development, free movement of goods and people. However, they didn't they didn't identify a specific reason which would be the result of this initiative that they find useful. On the contrary, we found that only 2% of citizens in Serbia identified that Open Balkan Initiative could be a greater opportunity for employment, which is contradictory because there is an agreement within the Open Balkan Initiative that should on the regulation of diplomas within the three countries, and that should speed up the process of getting the working permits. However, citizens obviously do not see that as a benefit, and that is why we can say that there are still no tangible results of this initiative.
So
yes, I would just like to add the positive part of this Open Balkan initiative is that we can say that there is a partial improvement in the relations between Serbia and Albania. We see that because two-thirds of citizens said that relations have improved to greater or lesser extent, but the relations between the two countries have improved. Of course, as you said, the bilateral relations and the closer cooperation between President Vučić and the Prime Minister Rama definitely contributed to this improvement. Still, we cannot say that there is, the relations are still strained because, first of all, because Albania was viewed negatively through the Kosovo issue primarily, and still this ethnic distance towards Albanians is still here, still present. So we cannot say that the relations are completely improved. And actually, a quarter of the citizens that we have surveyed believed that the status of Kosovo should first be resolved in order for this Open Balkan initiative to progress and to improve the relations between the two countries as well.
Thank you. So, as you know, Open Balkan initiative is only among these three countries now in the region, but I think it sparked vivid debates both in Bosnia and Herzegovina, especially in Montenegro, about joining the initiative or not. Prime Minister of Montenegro was even present at this wine fair that we were just discussing, Bandović, right? So maybe you can share your view, Leila and Olivera, about the position that your countries will be taking about this, if you know any of this, or how does it being perceived by the public in both Bosnia and Herzegovina and Montenegro?
Oh, thank you. So Open Balkans is something that's been on the table of the top of the country for quite some time now. It's not something that the doors are entirely closed to, but there is, I cannot detect some enthusiasm, or I personally don't see an added value. However, the OB has to be complemented as an authentic regional initiative coming out in a very quiet, in a period of the quiet of regional relations and, regional meetings and summits and so on. On the other side, we have the Berlin process, and we have a regional common market also. And then, when you think about any initiative, any upcoming initiative, not only the Open Balkans, you have to think about, is there an infrastructure? Is there a budget? Is there a...
Institutions.
Well, infrastructure, let's say,
okay.
Institutions. Is there a reporting envisaged? How the reporting looks like? What is the purpose? What is the content? Occasionally, what are the results? Who measures the results? Is there are there regular meetings on the technical level, not only on the summits on the political level? Because all of these additional parameters give us a picture of whether or not this is destined to work, or is just a result of daily politics or, periodical needs of a country or two, to mend their own relations. I'm personally very dissatisfied already as it stands today, with or without the without Open Balkans, when it comes to Bosnia and Herzegovina at this point. I'm very dissatisfied with the extent of representation of my country on the top layers of these regional organizations that are evolving out of these regional initiatives. I'm very dissatisfied with that. And it's becoming worse now after expiration of the mandate of the CEFTA director, who is a Bosnian. So, this is one of the things that's been on my mind for quite some time now. But all of these things that I'm talking about, you know, the substance, the structure, the infrastructure, the calendar, reporting, budget, you know, the content, purpose, interaction with other initiatives, with the SAP, the process of stabilization association, you know, these things I do not see in the open Balkans.
Thank you. Olivera, the
Again,
situation in Montenegro, maybe you can also share with us the view of Europe now.
again, the issue which was very highly politicized in last year, especially during the period of mandate of the minority government, because even in the government there were opponents of the open Balkans. Between the members of government, I mean, really, it's the analysis which I was going through in preparation for this panel. There are very interesting issues. For example, one related to the economic benefits of open Balkans in regard to Montenegro, because we are highly imported. Most of the things mainly from Serbia, but also from Bosnia, North Macedonia, and other regional countries. So you can imagine that's one point of view. But other point of view is actually we were deeply in the process of negotiation with the European Union for more than 10 years. Actually, it was in June 2012. It was 10 years since we started negotiations. So. Actually, it was in this period, in this last decade, it was adopted many documents in relation to the common regional market, to the Berlin process. Some of these agreements has been signed last week, actually, by this government, but many of other things which I was talking to my colleagues from the field of economy, there were plenty of other European Union standards was adopted in Montenegrin public policies during the last 10 years, and I'm not sure how much of the beneficiary would be for open Balkans. But on the other side, for regional stability, it's good to have this type of any type of regional cooperation. And from the position of view of the Minister of Defense, I was aware how much is important A5 for the region of Western Balkans and all other types of initiatives in the field of security and economy, not only for the political military stability of Western Balkans, but also for the building of the trust between the countries of the region. And I would say that we are facing not so much from the field of security, but from the field of social cohesion, as my colleague Leila said, in the Western Balkans, mainly we have 2 or 3 ethnic groups, and there is a lot of trust which need to be built in bilateral relations and multilaterally in Western Balkans. And I don't know if it's not in the field of economy when it is then. So I would be honest, I'm always in the point of view that we need to build the trust and the cohesion, but to have precise map and all the things, or some of the tools actually which Leila mentioned, the methodology, institutions, infrastructure, because we are facing changes. You know, if you ask me 3, 5, 4 years ago, will ever change political power in Montenegro, I would say maybe, but who knows when. But the changes happened, and now some of other countries also can change the government in their countries. Hopefully the changes are good, so from the point of view of democracy. But what will happen then if there is no precise methodology for everything? That's how I mention, and why I mention A5, for example, because it's politically military concept. But on the other side, if we have changes and political elites now which understand each other and respect each other and build a trust between each other, but the changes can cause problems, for example, for any type of initiative. And if you ask me, I will conclude, I'm always for European integrations, and not just because that I feel that Europeanization of the Montenegro is highly important for stability, security, but also for everything what is based for and important for modern society and for the future of my country.
Thank you. Let's see what is the future of this initiative and whether it will spread in the years to come. Before I go to the last round of questions from my side, I'm going to ask you to maybe prepare some question or two, which hopefully we'll have time for after this round of question, which is a rather controversial topic to conclude with, but this is why we discuss it, of course. And this is the topic of the Serbian world, the topic that has been dominating the media landscape in the region for the last year or two. Now it's a bit more silent since Aleksandar Vulin, who is the most vocal promoter of this idea, former Minister of Defense and current chief of the BIA, the
Security Intelligence
Agency, in Serbia has kind of promoted this idea the most vocally. So we have discussed, and we have, I mean, it is very difficult yet to conclude how it is seen differently by different actors, of course. Some see it as a revivalist strategy of reviving the Greater Serbia ideas from the 1990s. Some see it as an empty shell of a propaganda concept, which serves nothing than to kind of promote it in the public, the idea of the nationalism, and to profit politically from this. So how do the citizens of Serbia, first of all, see this concept, and do they support it?
The Serbian public is very polarized on this question. This year's survey shows that 40% of Serbian citizens support the creation of the Serbian world. However, only a third of Serbian citizens believe that it is possible to create this Serbian world, this concept, to become real. So this topic is a great example of how the Serbian society is actually ideologically polarized, and also it is interesting that there is correlation between this topic, the Serbian world, and also the citizens' views on regional relations. For example, most people who support the separation of the Republic of Srpska from Bosnia and Herzegovina and integration with Serbia, most of them who support that idea also support the creation of the Serbian world. Or, for example, most of the citizens that were surveyed that believe that Serbia should militarily intervene in case the Serbs in Bosnia and Herzegovina, for example, are attacked or threatened. They also support the creation of the Serbian world. So this is issue that really polarizes the Serbian public, and
so this is a topic that we can maybe observe the regional relations the best from. Maybe I don't have to really go in detail why this topic is so important for Bosnia and Herzegovina, also for Montenegro, of course, because these two countries were maybe in the focus of this discourse. And I mean, one of the aspects in which those who oppose the idea of the Serbian world, or actually who see it and observe it from the outside, have pointed out this revival of the 90s politics is maybe this new day of unity, of Serbian flag. I forgot the full name, to be honest. That is kind of connecting Republika Srpska and Serbia. So how do, I guess, public in Bosnia and Herzegovina is also polarized on this issue based on ethnic lines? How do they see it?
Rather ideological lines than ethnic. What we have to have in mind is that we are one of the countries in the world where power, political and any other power, is generated from ethnic identities, from the privileged, constitutionally privileged ethnic identities. So, once having said this, is it abnormal that political elites who are riding those three bulls in Bosnia and Herzegovina prefer to end up discussing this kind of topics. Yes, I mean it's not abnormal. It's rather okay for them. Is it good for the citizens and for the country? It's not. Does it make people more afraid? Yes, it does. Does it immobilize the electorate? Well, all of those who do not have any options to leave the country, yes, indeed. So, by the way, is Bosnia in that world?
I guess Republika Srpska is in that world, I'm guessing.
Okay. Okay, so what else is in that world?
Because the idea of, at least how Vulin is presenting, is a peaceful reintegration of all parts of the region where Serbs live. The Serbs are a majority, actually. So this is how he. So I'm guessing this is why I'm guessing Republika Srpska.
It's not only then.
I mean, this is more of a. I mean, as I said, this is more of a concept than a proper plan, I would say. So definitely, there is no written strategy about who would be included or not. This is just the idea.
So what I'm getting to is basically it's not a new thing. It's an old thing with a new brand. You know, we had RAM 1, RAM 2. We had different plans, different concepts with the same idea. Every time somebody was very clever and tried to make this happen, did not turn well for anybody, Serbs included.
I'm guessing, I mean, we have all this rhetoric, especially in Montenegro as well. As I would say, as much as it was used by nationalist politicians in Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, it is as much used in Montenegro as well, both by those who kind of support closer ties with Serbia and those who kind of see Serbia as the greater threat to the Montenegrin identity and Montenegrin independence. So how would you observe this from the Montenegrin standpoint, and is the Montenegrin public kind of divided on this topic as well?
I wouldn't say that this topic was so much present in the public debates, neither Open Balkans, I must be honest, especially from the point of view of professional publicity, I mean academia, civil society, and so on and so forth, but it's important to discuss about this, I agree. You know, it's always the issue of awakening of nationalism in Western Balkans is always this concern for all of us. I would say we are in the same circle for more than 3 decades, what is actually very, very controversial and of course very sensitive for our societies, and I would say that all our countries are vulnerable on any type of trying to promote any type of the concept which can awake nationalism or any type of bad feelings, I would say. And in that sense, what can evoke feelings in our national groups, ethnic groups, in both of our countries especially. You know, it's very difficult to have until now, I would say it was type of political narrative which was used by you mentioned 1, 2, 3 persons which are mentioning and distributed in media and through the public rhetoric, but behind that I would say still don't know what exists, because it was plenty of misunderstanding or something like that. I would like to know many of the things behind that understand better. For example, that's why I mentioned awakening nationalism and some political legacy and war legacy which we already have in our in our region, what is actually sensitive. And if we have this type of sensitive feelings, then anything what you mentioned which can cause and evoke any type of anxiety and nervous, making people nervous, it can have different results and influences, and can be reflected differently. So I'm really asking, for example, political opponents in my country use it very much for their daily politics. And I'm wondering, are they aware how much they can, how much negative consequences they can have with using this type of tools for any type of opposing and opposing each other? So sensitive, yes. I heard what survey showed. In my proposal would be, for example, to conduct any type of regional survey on the including most of this topic, not maybe such precisely, but you can put it in the qualitative analysis differently through the question how people feel about something, because probably we would get more results on that, how people from Montenegro, from Bosnia and Herzegovina, from other part of the region, because I would say never still are open the fears and the feelings from 1990s, especially from the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And you can see that in Montenegro regularly. For example, yesterday it was type of annual. It was 30 years since it was kidnapping people from Bosniak community in the train from Serbia to Montenegro. And you know, it's always open, it's always alive. Every time, whenever it's Srebrenica, every year you have that feelings in the society, how the people feel, and especially they're expressing their views through the social media. So very sensitive and vulnerable region is still on this type of issues, and I'm not preferring this type of narratives and rhetorics normally because I'm coming from totally different political discourse, and that's what I'm really doing in my country to this type of discourse to improve and to manage and to awake a little bit more people who are coming from that centric point of view that can improve our capabilities within the society to work on these issues and to solve the problems and maybe to arrange better plans for our children.
This is exactly how we started the discussion, that unfortunately the war never left the public discourse in the Western Balkans. So now
unfortunately.
At least this way. Thank you very much for this. Is there any questions from the audience? Please.
Corey Shea from the USMBC. My question is if you actually look at the verbiage of Serbian World, it talks about the protection of Serbs wherever they may live. Oh, sorry. So for those who are tuning in, Corey Shea from the US Embassy. So repeating what I just said, Serbian World talks about protection of Serbs wherever they may live. Lots of Serbs live in the United States. Lots of Serbs live in Germany. Lots of Serbs live in Austria. For those who support the Serbian World, do you have any sense that they are aware that this is a potential source of confrontation with not just the region, but the entire world?
Let's have a couple of questions.
Thank you. Massimo Moratti, I'm an independent researcher here in Belgrade. Yeah, I'm also coming from Italy, close to Trieste, so I joined the question because there's a large community of Serbs in Trieste, as we all know. But I've lived and worked 12 years in Bosnia. I've been living here in Belgrade for 7 years on human rights issues. And I'm asking myself about the question of the compensation. I mean, is there any data how the issue of compensation is being discussed in the past? The relationships between Bosnia and Serbia have been really fluctuating in the past years. In 2006, it was much better, then it became worse, then now it's becoming even worse recently. So has there been any correlation how this perception of compensation of territories is dependent on the actual leadership, both in Sarajevo, Banja Luka, and here in Belgrade? Thank you.
Thank you. One more question, maybe, if you have time. So concerning the first issue, I would just take the liberty to answer directly because, I mean, this is, of course, the panel about the regional relations. And I'm pretty sure that Vulin never meant Chicago would join the Serbian World. So maybe if you have any...
But he said it. So it's something to consider because intent doesn't matter.
Of course.
How it's perceived.
Well, I think intent maybe does matter if it is exactly, if it's at least a plan discussed, or is it just a propaganda machine? This is what I'm referring to. You know. But of course, if you want to answer any of the questions, maybe you can start with Leila.
This comes down to a very poor and deteriorating political culture that we live in the Western Balkans, and total absence of the sense of political responsibility when you come up with this kind of statements. I don't know if they're more absurd, ridiculous, or cheeky, you know? I don't see anything intelligent about them. I don't see even anything credible about them. I don't see anything powerful about them. They're just super irritating. Thank you.
Fully agree. No political culture and lack of political responsibility for any politicians or public servants or anyone who is speaking about these topics. And as our colleague from US said, that's how it could be considered, really, because there is a big, for example, diaspora, Serbian diaspora everywhere in the world. So if we count on it, and if we put it in the context of new era of uncertainty, especially after the aggression of Russia against Ukraine, what we can think about, which type of fragmentation we can expect. So that's why I mentioned it's much better to have more serious debates on these issues, not just in Western Balkans, but everywhere, because intellectuals and academia and all people, you know, aware of the potentials for the conflicts around need to condemn this type of
rhetoric.
If you may just add about the question of the Serbian world, most of the results show that most of the people who said that they support the creation of the Serbian world, they are supporters of the government, current government. So that could also be the explanation why such high number of 40% is a lot for creation for support of such a concept. So that is also
probably the frustration of the last 30 years about the regional relations and the police of Serbia. Thank you to all three of you for this very interesting debate. Thank you all for joining us for this discussion. I would invite you one more time to read into this report that we just published, and also to the Balkan Defence Monitor, and we are looking forward to follow this discussion in the next years. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.